And I would like to already introduce ourselves a bit while the feedback is dropping in. My name is Ulrich Köllisch. I'm leading the data integrity part in our company, GxP-CC. I've been working for a while in this area, around 7 years now. I'm also co-heading the PDA special interest group. So if anybody of you is interested to collaborate there, yeah, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm also happy to have Talea with us today. Hello, Talea.
Hi, Ulrich. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this webinar. So I've been working as a consultant, mainly on topics of data integrity, and I have previous experience with managing clinical trials and real-world studies. So we will be happy to discuss these topics with you today.
Yeah, great. And now we also have some sorry, the screen is exactly on the wrong way. We have some results, so we are more or less medium-sized in data integrity and GCP. And in order also to shape upcoming webinars and also this webinar with you, I would like to introduce you a second question before we then really get into the topic. Which topics are you most interested? I'm also a bit flexible in the explanation, so please feel free to also fill out this part of the survey and support us with some insights. For this, I will now not wait, but I will have it on parallel and let you know the results in a moment. So we will go to the slides, and yeah, we did the introduction, and maybe Talea, you can give us a brief overview about our program today.
Yes, so Ulrich will start with an introduction to data integrity principles to make sure that we bring everyone on the same page. And then I will continue with defining the scope of GCP and what are the data integrity requirements. Also, what is the scope of the, what are inspectors checking when it comes to GCP inspections. And then we will move to different approaches for a sponsor to achieve data integrity in clinical trials and studies. And at the end, we are going to present to you some couple of case studies which show the importance of data integrity in clinical trials and what can go wrong if this is not complied with.
Great,
So back
thank
to
you.
you.
Yeah, so I will take over the introduction and provide you some principles on data integrity, which are commonly applicable not only for clinical trials, but also for the GMP area, of course. So as we all know, the data is really, really important for us in our industry because we rely on it, especially in the clinical area. We more or less produce data as main outcome in order to have safe and effective medication. So in the end, the patient relies on it, and it's the backbone of our industry. I always like the picture of explaining data integrity like a temple. The temple is only stable if all the columns are stable, and these columns are represented here in this picture by different factors. We call it the hard facts, like processes, systems, and procedures. They are hard facts because you can change them relatively quickly with CAPAs, with change management, and so on. But we should also not neglect the soft facts, which are also very important pillars, which are people's mindset and quality culture. They are, of course, much more difficult to change and more in long-term programs reachable, but they come more and more in focus also for data integrity programs in order to have really a complete picture and to have the complete basis for data integrity. And you can also say the same for quality culture. Most of you might be familiar. I saw it in the first survey that we have some experts here with the ALCOA principle. So data integrity can be described as reliable and trustworthy and complete data fulfilling the ALCOA. This is the FDA definition from their most recent guideline. And ALCOA stands for attributable, which is ensured by, for example, access control to computerized systems. Legible, data retention plays a role here. So how do I keep my data legible, especially in the clinical area for very long retention times? Contemporaneously recorded, data must be recorded at the moment where it's created, or as contemporaneous as possible, where computers are very much better than human when they are signing by hand. We need an original or a true copy of the data set, which can also be of particular challenge in the long-term data retention sets we have. And it should be accurate, which is, for example, ensured by validation, calibration activities, and so on. It's important to see data integrity not isolated, in my opinion, but we need data integrity, which could be stated as to have the data right, but we also need data quality, which includes that the data is fit for the intended use for the purpose. So this could also include to have the right data. As an example, if I have a study and I only have one sub-part of subjects in my study, it could be that my data is completely integer, but it's not fit for the intended use, so that the decision which relies on the data is not valid then. But also patterns like processable, searchable data play a role in order to assure data quality. We refer to the pyramid of wisdom, and this is an important factor currently in knowledge management, which comes more and more into place into the pharmaceutical quality management systems, enforced also by the ICH Q9 and Q10 guidelines. That means that we want to have data, and this is the basis of this pyramid. So this data has to be reliable again in order to create information. Information could be something where we rely a decision on it, like, for example, a decision on an endpoint, but also in GMP world, a decision on batch release. And taking together this information, we can gather knowledge. So we can, for example, identify patterns and trends, and then make the right conclusions, which we could demonstrate or name as wisdom, which plays more and more a role in the clinical area because there's a lot of data available. And we will see that later. Maybe the use, it's at the beginning not completely clear, but data can be used later in real-world data and real-world evidence, as we can see. What I want to emphasize is that we don't only need data integrity, but both integrity and quality in order to drive it forward, to make data-related decisions and make the whole system work. One point I always like to highlight is critical thinking skills. It's a buzzword, so I want to give you a brief explanation what it means. So critical thinking means that there's no one size fits it all, no checklist solutions. We have to solve a bit from this understanding that we have one checklist and we just tick the boxes. But we should work on an analytical, scientific, logical, or knowledge base to drive the right decisions. And this includes also the decisions where to start with the data integrity program, where to set the focus on. Because in reality, we will not have unlimited resources. So we have to prioritize our actions and not consider those actions which are low in benefit and high in effort, or get stuck in data integrity assessments, for example. What is relatively new and good, in my opinion, is that it's now written black and white, that the regulations are also aware of this concept, because it's one very important and I think a very, very good paragraph of the PICS guideline, which was finalized in last year, July, which says that it's an indicator of data governance maturity if you understand and accept residual risks. Because it's unlikely that the assessments have been well done if there is the assumption that there is no risk left. The last bigger principle I want to bring in here is a data lifecycle. So data is not a one-time task. Data integrity is not a one-time task, or also data governance, obviously, but it's a lifecycle task. So data lifecycle is here referred to creation, processing, review, reporting, and use, retention and retrieval and destruction. So that's how the EMA or the ISPE guideline define it. And there are different risks occurring in different areas of the data lifecycle. It would be advisable and ideal if we foresee all this in the beginning before we design the process, or when we design the process, which can be referred to data integrity by design. And here's a very nice example which illustrates the data lifecycle for a clinical trial setup. For now, I don't want to go into details here, but here you can see a yeah, let's say typical data lifecycle or typical setup of a clinical trial where you have different parties. So this is already one of the challenges which comes out for GCP in particular, considering data integrity. We got different parties involved, like the sponsor, like an investigator. There could be a CRO or even other contract laboratories involved. So we got a multitude of responsibilities, and it should be clear from the beginning how it's designed, how the data flow is designed. Here you can see the EDC as central system of this trial, and where the data inputs and outputs are. So really how the data flows. I want to give the full credit for this very nice image to Laurie Schüssler, who presented it at the ISPE Expert Exchange last year, because it's really powerful in my opinion and gives a good overview what it means to have a high-level data flow. Of course, you can then go more into detail and check more detailed facilities of this data flow map. But I think as a first overview, it's really, really strong and really good. Finally, the data lifecycle I was talking about should not be seen isolated. Data lives, electronic data in particular lives together with computerized systems. So we also have to consider the system life cycles, which are here depicted as a V model, the classical V model from the GAMP guide. So one data set could, of course, as we have seen in the previous slide, go through different systems, and therefore there would be implications in the design of the systems in order to fulfill data integrity requirements and to have a good setup. But this is not all. It's not only the systems and the data. We also have to see the product lifecycle, and I think this is a point of growing importance. We will also see in the next chapter of this talk that we have a product lifecycle which contains different phases of the product development, the clinical trials, and then the GMP phase, where we are in the commercial phase of a product. Good. With that, I would like to conclude the discussion, the introduction of the discussion, the introduction, and give over to Talea, and want to invite you also to put in your question and your comments into the Q&A panel you can see on your right side. Okay.
Thank you, Ulrich. So let's dive now into the GCP topic. So let's start first with the scope of GCP inspections and why they are conducted and what are the topics of data integrity which are addressed during this inspection. So first of all, the agencies conduct GCP inspections during the course of clinical trials, mostly after the end of them, during marketing authorization applications. And there are two main reasons for doing that. First of all, to ensure that the patients are protected during the trial, but also to ensure that the data is of good quality and they can be trusted to support the marketing authorization application. At which levels now they are conducted, this can be diverse. Of course, the two primary ones are the trial sites, so the clinics and the investigator sites where the clinical studies and trials are conducted. And it can be really local, so just the team that conducts the trial, but also the systems of the whole hospital or clinic can be checked during an inspection. Then the sponsor can also be audited. However, also vendors that are contracted to participate or manage the studies are also inspected, like CRO facilities or central labs and other third-party vendors that might be implicated in the trial. Which are the main agencies that conduct this inspection? So in EU, we have a central EMA inspectorate, which is organized with the GCP Inspectors Working Group that are requested to perform inspections from the Committee of Human Medicinal Products as part of the marketing authorization applications. And these are conducted mostly once the trials are completed. However, the EMA itself does not have employed central inspectors, but uses the regulatory bodies of each individual EU country to conduct the trials, and then these report the data back to and the findings back to the EMA, so there is collaboration. On the other hand, the US FDA conducts most GCP inspections as part of the Bioresearch Monitoring Program, and there are several offices, especially within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, that conduct different types of inspections. Of course, there are also national authorities. For instance, in Germany, the GCP Inspections Unit conducts inspections at different levels on behalf of the EMA, but also on behalf of the Federal Institute for Medicinal Products. And in Germany, for example, compliance to the GCP rules and to the regulations, as these are high contained within the Medicinal Act for drugs, are legally binding. So it's very important to ensure compliance. Now, let's talk about the scope of GxP during the clinical studies and the product life cycle. First of all, you see that both the FDA and the EMA consider the GCP principles throughout the drug product development. This does not mean that an inspector will check the preclinical tests or the research and development before the trial application or the first clinical studies. However, it is a good practice to use systems and documentation practices, which will be later followed also under the good clinical practices. On the other hand, sometimes there are conflicting views of what, for instance, is considered GLP compliance. For instance, the FDA only considers GLP to be applicable up to the first in human application. So after that, it is not applicable. However, for the GLP principles should apply until the beginning of manufacturing post the market access authorization for the EMA. And of course, there are more principles which apply once the drugs are in the market. Irrespectively of which particular GxP principles are applicable throughout the development of a medicinal product, what is true is that one of the basic topics that are addressed during inspections, especially inspections during marketing authorization applications, are focused on the quality management systems and data governance. And this is depicted within the recent FDA guidance of 2019, and also in the paper by McDowell in of the same year, where they basically highlight that these inspections have three basic focuses: to show that the sponsor, the company, is ready for commercial manufacturing and they're conformant to their application, but also to conduct a data integrity office, indeed to show that the data which are included in the application are reliable. Let's focus now more into the actual clinical development and trials. So as we said before, the main reason to follow GCP, and this is used as a standard for all studies, is to show that the patients are, the patient safety is ensured, but also that the reported data is solid and accurate. It can support an application for a market access authorization. The GCP principles apply throughout from phase 1 to phase 3 up to the application for a market access authorization, but also in post-authorization studies. For sure, they apply in interventional studies, which are post-marketing, but also it is a very hot topic and a topic of debate whether GCP is also to be applied in non-interventional studies, and there are many lines of evidence supporting that it is, mainly because according to the EMA, all subsequent applications to be used to support the authorization should be abiding to the GCP principles. So for instance, if somebody's conducting non-interventional studies to follow up and create more data on their initial authorization, they need to show that this follows the GCP principles, but also according to the World Health Organization and the MHRA, data integrity principles should be applicable throughout the GxP spectrum. So the best advice we have here is to be complying with GCP throughout the product lifecycle development. We briefly talked about the post-authorization status. This is a very much growing topic, and especially a focus for the FDA that has published already numerous guidances, and they're planning to publish even more. What they define real-world data is all data which are collected to observe the patient health status or the delivery of healthcare, which is routinely performed and collected from a variety of sources. And the real-world evidence is all the clinical evidence which is basically obtained from the analysis of the real-world data. What is the reason, though, that someone might consider doing a real-world study? So it's mostly to provide additional data that, first of all, can support the approval of a new indication for a drug which is already approved by the FDA, but also in case of a conditional authorization to provide more evidence and support post-approval requirements. What is the take-home message from here is that also for these studies, which are non-interventional, the sponsor is responsible for ensuring that the systems that are used during these studies have to be compliant with 21 CFR Part 11, meaning the electronic systems and the electronic signatures, and also to ensure data integrity. So now that we defined the scope of GCP and we showed how important it is to comply with the GCP principles, we are going to address how what the best approaches and the requirements to ensure compliance with data integrity within the GCP scope. So first of all, according to the ICH GCP 6, which is fully adopted by the EMA, meaning that it is the law in EU, a sponsor is responsible for the quality management of the trial, and they should ensure that a QMS is implemented throughout the stages of the trial process. And the focus should be on the activities which ensure the safety of the human participants of the trial and also the reliability of the results. The responsibility of the sponsor also relies into designing tools and procedures for data collection and processing, or in case there are vendors involved, to ensure that these are designed properly. And also the risk-based approach is always the preferred method. Furthermore, sponsors are required to follow to have a quality assurance and quality control systems with written SOPs to ensure that the studies are conducted in a compliant manner and the data are produced and are reliable, and that there is direct access to trial sites, source data, and documents, and that the monitoring and inspection requirements are fulfilled. Furthermore, there should be quality control applied during the data handling to ensure correct data processing and reliability. When it comes to trial design, qualified individuals should be used, and the sponsor is reliable for that, for the whole process, from the protocol design until the final preparation of the clinical reports. And last but not least, it is also the responsibility of the sponsor of the trial to define, establish, and allocate all trial-related duties and functions. Coming back to the topic of the third-party vendors and in particular the CROs, so contract research organizations which can be used for managing different parts or conducting on behalf of the sponsor clinical study. What is it explicit from the ICH-GCP, which is adopted by the EMA, is that no matter what responsibility and task is assigned by contract to the CRO, the ultimate responsible for assuring that there is that all trial-related duties are conducted correctly is the sponsor. So the final responsibility is always with the sponsor. They should have at all times oversight of all activities, also the ones which are passed to a third party. Going more now into the topic of the systems used in a clinical trial, there is a draft version of a guideline for electronic systems used in clinical trials, which is now under review. And before the finalization of this draft guidance, there was a notice to sponsors by the EMA. This notice basically highlights how important the sponsor, how crucial it is for sponsors to maintain compliance and oversight over the clinical systems used, even if these are developed or supported by or used by third parties. So, excuse me. So first of all, sponsors are requested to apply due diligence to ensure that the tasks which are distributed to vendors are clearly documented and agreed, and that each party has control and full access to the data and information according to their legal responsibilities. So for instance, they should make sure that for example, an investigator has access to the draft data, to the source data, even if these are recorded into a tool which is managed by a vendor, because this is a legal obligation. Furthermore, according to the ICH, the EMA responds that the ultimate responsibility for the quality and integrity of the trial data always resides with the sponsor. The sponsor should ensure and document that all electronic data processing and systems conform to the sponsor's established requirements for completeness, accuracy, reliability, and consistent intended performance, meaning validation. Now, what specific responsibilities are there to follow with regard to electronic systems for clinical trials and electronic data? First of all, there should be a focus on the quality management, meaning that the sponsor should ensure that SOPs are maintained properly and they're followed, that there is a list of individuals with authority to change the data, also when the systems is managed by a vendor, and also that there is a safeguard to the blinding. These are three topics which are under the responsibility of the sponsor. On the other hand, with regard to the systems and the data, data integrity should be ensured, of course, adequate data backup and availability, and that the systems should be designed to permit documented changes and prohibit deletion, meaning that the systems have to be designed with audit trails, that the security system prevents unauthorized access to the data, so access control should be very well overseen, and at last but not least, that the system is conformant to the standards and the procedures established by the sponsor. More details on different topics which should be covered and overseen by sponsors from the different guidances, you can find in the draft guideline of the EMA, which has received all the comments from the industry and is now being finalized, but also within the FDA 21 CFR Part 11 and the latest guidance for industry in computerized systems used in clinical trials. And of course, in the ICH GCP E6. Now, going back to this draft guidance for electronic systems and data, there are three main topics which are highlighted within this guidance, and these need to be very well addressed and monitored by the sponsors. First of all, when it comes to system validation and functionality testing, system owners that come from the sponsor side have to maintain oversight over validation activities and make sure that there is enough thorough documentation by the contracted parties. Also, that this documentation is maintained in order to be able to show the validated state of a system, both for software validation, but also for trial-specific configuration validation, because it is being repeated by the agencies that each trial has to have a specific validation to make sure that the trial-specific data is properly handled. The second topic, which is highlighted, is recovery. So there should be solid recovery plans, and these should be part of contractual agreements before the initiation of a trial. And finally, when it comes to decommissioning, there should be available archive formats with the possibility to restore the databases. And at last but not least, the topic of decommissioning, when this is no longer possible, the EMA expects sponsors to ensure that all the data and metadata are available in dynamic data files. On this last point, there were many comments from the industry citing topics, citing abstracts from the GAM guide and the PICS guidance for risk-based decisions. So they request that this is to be reconsidered, so the dynamic data files to be retained, and they request, on the other hand, to modify this test to reach a risk-based decision and to preserve the data in human-readable formats such as PDFs. And now I will pass the torch to Ulrich for the next part about mapping.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Talia. Yes, and coming back to this issue with the guidelines, so this EMA guideline is of particular interest for us also because it's the first big data integrity guideline from the EMA. And as Talia told you, there were really, I was also involved in the industry review from the PDA. We took also part and reviewed it. And this retention paragraph, I think it should be improved because we should have a risk-based decision when a data set is complete. So the dynamic data, like for example, a database can be transferred, the information can be transferred to PDF in a meaningful way in many instances. Not in every instance, as you might know from the GMP area. In chromatographic data, FDA is very explicit that this is not possible, but I think in many instances. So I am looking out when it's published, but I cannot really yet see the date. So it's still in the review mode from the EMA now, this guideline, and let's see when it comes out. So our review was in December last year. Okay. And also one part, and a very good part of this guideline, is the request for a detailed diagram and description on the transmission of electronic data. So which data will be transferred and in which format, where does the data come from, how are the different parties connected with it, who has which responsibilities and so on. And of course, timing of the transfers and actions which may be applied to the data. And that's the same picture I had before, because that comes more or less down and nails it down to data management plan, which in my opinion should always include a data flow map, because it's just us as human beings being very visual, and we can see connections and risks much better in a two-dimensional flowchart like here than in an endless FMEA risk assessment table. So if we have a look here, we can see the many parties which are available. We can see data sources. So where does the data come from? And we can also see an overview of system. And you can see that it's a huge variety of systems which is involved here. So let's have a look here at the left side. 1 second, I will make. I will try, here at the IRT system. So we got the IRT system for the delivery of the drug and the randomization. And the system can be very huge, but there's also the EDC system, which are also huge systems. And if we consider we have a CRO and we have a provider for the EDC system and we have a sponsor, then we already have 3 parties. So that this requirement for having the validation documentation available in a meaningful time it's really not so simple to fulfill, but I think it's really important, and it comes from this experience, also from the agencies and from the inspectors, that these documents, these important documents and data, have not been available. Also, you can see that there is some highlight, and I think that's coming up and getting more and more important. Patient-recorded outcome devices. Also, bring your own devices will be more in focus, which enable a new handling of trials like decentralized clinical trials, and will therefore facilitate the conduction of meaningful clinical trials, but will also imply other data integrity risks, which should be considered again in a risk-based approach and give us a chance to improve the setup.
Okay, now let's move to the roles and responsibilities. So according to the ICH GCP, there are 2 main responsible parties by legislation for the conduct of a trial. First of all is the investigator, and they're responsible for their subjects, the patients that are included in the trial. They're also responsible for generating data, constructing the records for the trial, and they can use their own software and hardware. So there is no restriction at the moment on the part of the investigator when it comes to the systems. Now, when we transition from the recording of data to the processing of the data, which is the responsibility of the sponsors, they are responsible for supplying or managing the computerized systems used for processing the data and also for the generated records, either directly or indirectly via managing vendors such as CROs, providers of different systems, such as those that Ulrich mentioned before, EPROs, CRFs, or IRT systems. Both parties retain full responsibility even if the tasks are delegated for data integrity, data security, and data confidentiality, as mentioned earlier. A good way to make sure that the oversight is kept and to ensure that all that the proper control is addressed is by constant reconciliation of the data or review of defined KPIs, which have to be set up at the beginning of the study. Now, when it comes to contracts, this is a very important point to consider. They should be very clearly stating all the delegated responsibilities. There should be clear distribution of tasks, meaning who is providing and controlling a computerized system in the course of the trial, and also it should be evident and ensure that each party has control and access to the data and information according to their legal responsibilities. As mentioned also earlier, for instance, a good example is the maintenance is that investigators have access to the source data, even if these are produced by clinical systems which are managed by vendors. Within the documentation, it should be and the documentation of this access should be included within all relevant documents, such as the procedures, the protocol, and within the contracts and agreements. And of course, it should be clearly documented which standards have to be followed, which are applicable for all the sites in all the countries that the trial is conducted. What is very interesting to highlight here, and is also very explicitly documented by the EMA, is that if appropriate contracts cannot be put in place, because, for instance, a vendor refuses to provide full access or to be available for inspections or provide documents to the sponsor, then this vendor should not be used for a trial. The EMA is very rigid on that. So, what are specific topics which have to be addressed when there is a specific contract between a sponsor and a CRO that conducts part of the trial? There are three very important topics. First of all, there should be clear documentation of the oversight of the trial-related duties. So, which duties are to be taken by the CRO, and the fact that the sponsor should maintain oversight of these. Another big topic is the data management, meaning who has access to control of the data according to their responsibilities. Even if the data is managed by the CRO, the sponsor should have access to the data. And also the responsibilities for documentation retention throughout the required period, but also the format of the documentation. At last but not least, computerized systems are also a big focus, especially according as stated in the latest draft guideline of the EMA. And they should ensure that appropriate controls are applied in the systems, that the validation takes place according to published standards, and the specifications exists of the system which is being developed, and also that the system can handle subsequent protocol changes that might be needed during the course of the study. More information about the specific topics that need to be part of a contract between a sponsor and a CRO can be found in the FDA 21 CFR Part 3 1252 for obligations, for transfer of obligations to a CRO, and also within the Appendix 1 of the EMA draft guidance for computerized systems in clinical trials. Now, we talked about the obligations. However, what are some good tools and ways to ensure that this oversight is taking place, and to ensure that the systems that are used by a supplier are compliant? There are different ways. A good start is to conduct a thorough audit before the contract is signed or before the supplier is selected, where the sponsor will check the certifications of the supplier and also have a thorough review over their QMS, especially when these certifications are not available. So they should make sure that the systems are designed as documented in the SOPs, and there is thorough documentation for the development of different tools. Another way to ensure that a system is fit for its intended use is to provide a predefined user requirement document to the supplier, either before the development of a system or in order to make sure that the requirements set by the sponsor are part of the design specifications of the software or system to be used. Finally, both parties should, on top of the contract for the trial, sign a service level agreement, which will ensure which responsibilities and which topics need to be addressed. When it comes to vendor auditing, this is a topic that is very much addressed by the guidances. First of all, we have the ICH GCP, which has three main rules. That first of all, the sponsor should ensure that the auditing of clinical trial systems is conducted in accordance to their SOP, so according to the QMS, that the observations and findings during these audits are well documented, and that individuals that are selected to perform these audits are carefully selected and should be not independent from the people who use the systems. On the other hand, in the draft guidance, which is soon to be published by the EMA, it is stated that sponsors, as specified in contracts, have the right to conduct audits at the vendor site, and the vendor site should be should accept to be subject to inspections at all times. And if not, as mentioned before, they should not be used as a vendor for a trial. At the end, also sponsors can rely, of course, on vendor qualification documentation. However, they have to review it to make sure that their QMS is evaluated, and also in case some shortcomings are documented during this review, there should be enough documentation and assurance that these problems can be mitigated by the responsible party. And this brings us to our last topic, which are case studies. So we are going to focus on two different topics. One about EDCs, so electronic data capture systems and audit trail review. And the other one, which Ulrich is going to talk about, is the responsibilities of sponsors to oversee CROs. So we will start with the first one. So this was an FDA inspection to a sponsor as part of an application for a new drug authorization for molecular entity. And the problem here was the EDC. So the EDC is the electronic system, for those that don't know, which captures the data which are produced by the investigator sites. So in this particular trial, there was a separation of the EDC. We had part alpha, the red one, which was managed by the CRO, and this was found to be to have adequate audit trails, and this was collecting the majority of the data for the pivotal study. However, there was a subpart of the EDC, beta in gray, which was handled by a vendor. And the rationale behind the separation was that the part which was supported by the vendor had to be separated to secure the blinding. So this part of the EDC was collecting data primarily on the primary efficacy endpoint. And when this system was inspected, it was shown that 50% of the audit trails within it were inadequate. And how were these inadequate? First of all, they started with the same individual, same subject, on the same date, and there was no explanation given for this event. So when the FDA went back to the sponsor to ask what was how they could basically answer to this issue, this finding, the sponsor explained that initially when the trial was set up, there was a different EDC. So not EDC beta, the light gray, but another EDC delta, which was still collecting the primary efficacy endpoint. However, during the conduct of the trial, and when a vendor audit was conducted by the sponsor realized that this EDC part, the one managed by the vendor, was not compliant to 21 CFR Part 11, meaning that there was no audit trail. So in order to mitigate this, they both decided to establish a new EDC, the EDC beta, which was used further on, the light gray. But however, all the data had to be transferred first to the system. So before there was no audit trail, once they migrated to the new EDC system, there was audit trail. So therefore, everything started from there, although the trial was ongoing. What happened then after this finding? So the outcome was that the FDA requested thousands of pages of paper-based certified copies of source records to make sure that all the data recorded there without an audit trail initially were actual patient data that could be trusted. The application was very much delayed, but was able to move forward because the data was finally salvaged. However, if the source data had been electronic, then this reconstruction would not have been possible. So what is the take-home message here? It is highlighted that it's very essential for a vendor to be audited by a sponsor before the beginning of a trial. There should be an evaluation of the system's adequacy and also review of appropriate controls and documentation. And also that true responsibility should be established by third-party agreements. And on top of that, establishing from early on an audit trail review is a very good practice. which brings us to the second part of the case studies with Ulrich.
Yeah, thank you. And connecting to your point, Talea, I have been at the DIA, which is the Drug Information Association global meeting last month in Chicago, and of course I was asking what are the main topics of interest in the space of data integrity and clinical trials and GCP. And one answer was indeed meaningful audit trail review. So this is one of the big questions in the field. How can I define a meaningful audit trail review for my situation, and which timing do I choose, and how can I reflect the interest also of the sponsor in order to understand, like in this case, I think that's a very good case to explain that, to realize in time that something is wrong. So this is also good. The clinical space is a good space where the agencies work together. So we see a lot of collaboration between the MHRA and the FDA, and I can recommend to join their symposium. They have it each year, and there they were also discussing these cases. So you can get a lot of information from there, and it's really a good place where the agencies work together and also provide knowledge to us in the field. So audit trail was the one part, audit trail review. The second part was indeed vendor management. So how can I provide the controls? How can I make audits? And this is of course fueled by some investigations in the last year. So we can see from September of last year here one case where clinical studies by two CROs have been called unacceptable by the FDA. And they were called unacceptable because of data integrity concerns, and therefore the studies would need to be repeated. Wrong button, but no problem. So of course approvals are then delayed, and medication is in particular not available for patient. So it has a really huge impact to be careful about this CROs, because they have a huge power. They take over a lot of the service. The sponsor stays ultimately responsible, as we talked before. And I think that's a topic going far over the GCP area only. Pharmaceutical companies did not see the data integrity risk in third-party interaction. And I think it gets more and more evident that this has been a blind spot in the data integrity space, but also in the quality management space, to really focus also on the third parties, because they have an influence on the business. And it goes even further, as we have learned in the past, in the COVID pandemic. We also rely very much on supply chains, and also here the data is of huge importance, because me as a contract giver, I rely on the data which comes from the contract acceptor. So we have to resolve this blind spot throughout the field, in my opinion. And of course, it made its way through the press. You can imagine if studies are stopped, they have to be repeated. This is a big story. Also went through the news. It were Indian CROs, but I'm sure that this could happen everywhere in the world. And now one can think, okay, this is an FDA case. FDA is very strict, isn't it? But the one-to-one photocopy, it's not a copy, not a true copy at least. The one-to-one case you can find from the EMA, just came out in May this year. Also here we have the suspension of marketing authorization for generica, for generic medicines, which were tested by one institute. So they had carried out the bioequivalence studies, and they had the same issues, quality management system issues in general, but stated out the reliability of data. There's one question from Gerhard. Are the symposiums online available? Partly they are. I can recommend the, what is it? The CDER makes available some talks, and I think some of them are freely available.
Yes.
For this year's symposium, I don't know exactly, but for last year, it is available. You can contact me. They are on YouTube, so that's really relatively open, and I appreciate that very much.
Yes, and also a very interesting event is every 2 years a joint symposium by the MHRA FDA, and last time was also joined by Health Canada, where they discuss during the course of 2 days topics and also their views of how the different agencies approach them. And I think this is not freely available, but we attended the last one and we can give more information of what was discussed upon request.
Yeah, and what there, I opened the Menti and would like to ask you for a quick feedback for the session, how you liked it before I go into this topic very briefly. The hottest topics in this year were, and Talia, please add if I forget something, decentralized trials and real world data, real world evidence, because due to this all cloud system setup, we have really new possibilities to leverage data and to get evidence out of existing data, which then can really support applications and patients' needs.
Yes, and another topic which was also thoroughly discussed was validation of different systems using trials and whether they should be validated for each specific study or not. And yes, the regulators were explicit that it should be always validated a system before going live for a certain trial.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for your participation. I have one last question, please. If you're still in the Mentimeter, take this minute for us. Thank you for your very positive feedback also. And I would like to invite you to give us topics where you're particularly interested in. We are very eager to build up more GCP data integrity topics, also webinars. And yeah, we're happy to know your needs and yeah, apply it accordingly. And of course, also always feel free to reach out directly to us to follow us on LinkedIn and so on, as you always can do. And with that, I would like to thank you very much.
Sorry, Ulrich, do we have 1 minute because there is another question?
Yeah, we have
Yes, so
exactly 2 minutes.
great. So there is a follow-up question by Gerard. So validation for each trial, yes. So the expectation is that for each trial there is a validation of a system because each trial can have specific fields that need to be filled, specific countries which participate that have different regulations. And the regulator suggests that if the validation is not to be repeated for each trial, at least there should be enough documentation to basically explain why this was not conducted. But they expect this to happen, to have a validation for each trial.
Again, critical thinking and risk management is
Yes.
the key. So the GAMP principles you should also apply here, and I think it makes a lot of sense. What are the special fields for the trial which were changed? Thank you. Then I wish you all a nice evening or day wherever you are in the world, and yeah, looking forward to meet you next time.
Yes, and we can still have questions here if people want to stay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, is there a risk-based approach for a progressive validation so that I can use older validations and build up or revalidate?
Yes, that's what I meant. Yeah, of course, you don't have to reinvent the wheel in every scenario new, as you would also not do in GMP. So one take-home message should also be, I think, to apply the principles the same way in the different areas.
Yes.
So yeah, that's also the one basic principle of the GAMP. If the supplier already has the system applicable in different places, you also don't go through the complete validation, through the complete development each time, which is, I think, similar from the logical point of view. Right?
Great. Good. Then I think this concludes it. Thank you very much.